President Masterson?
Here.
Speaker Reichman?
Here.
Secretary Burns-Wallace?
Here.
Mr. Orman? Mr. Orman? Mr. Pickert? Mr. Pickert? And Mr. Rolfe?
Here.
Okay, very good. We've got a full agenda with updates from two of our advisory panels today. I think what I'd like to do is turn it over to our director, John Paralisi. John, are you with us?
Yeah, I am here. Let me just see if I can share my screen to get us started.
Okay.
Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time before a holiday weekend for this session. This is a pretty important meeting. This is one half of the culmination of the work for the Spark process. And so today, two of the advisory panels will be presenting their portfolio recommendations to the Spark Executive Committee. So as we go through this, I will provide a little bit of kind of upfront context, but really it's going to be the chairs of the panels who do the presenting for the work from their panels. And at which point I will just continue on as a slide jockey for them. So in terms of the agenda for today, as I mentioned, this is really meant to be an informational update. First of two sessions, the second one coming on Monday. I'm going to give a little bit of an advisory panel update. Then next will be connectivity portfolio recommendation from the chairs of that panel, Senator Peterson and Melinda Stanley. And then moving into efficiency and modernization recommendations with the chairs of that, Representative Waymaster and Mark Hutton. Then a brief update around some other Spark areas, as well as just kind of a brief touch base on next steps. So in terms of
John, that you look pretty shaven, buddy. That's a good look. You must have gotten some good things done through these committees to look so dapper.
Just as an aside to everyone, I think it was on the first meeting that John Rolfe had said, so will you agree to shave off your beard if you get to the end of this? And so I don't think I ever really agreed to it, but I figured just to kind of honor that comment, I would shave it off. The one thing I will say is people usually prefer me with my face more covered up, but you asked for it, John. So anyway, to get back to this, just as a reminder, here is the structure overall that had been set up by the Spark Executive Committee before I came on board. And the goal really was to understand how to be able to optimize the allocation of the Spark funds in the long-term interest of Kansas, thinking about it strategically. We'll talk about the guiding principles in a moment. But to really do that through 4 advisory panels, 2 of which you're going to be hearing from today, 2 on Monday, with some staff supporting that and bringing their recommendations up to the Spark Executive Committee, which would then be able to look across the recommendations and think about them in an integrated context. So one thing to note is that the Spark Executive Committee across these 4 panels will be seeing more funding requests than exist to be funded out of the Spark funds. That's by design so that the committee can make trade-offs. A couple other things I'd mention on the slide is that I would like to just put out an incredible thank you on my behalf and really on behalf of Kansas to the chair people and the panelists on each one of these 4 panels. They did yeoman's work over the last couple months. None of them are on these panels because they had a lack of things to do in their day jobs, I'm sure. But they were incredibly committed and just super focused on serving Kansas the best way they could. And I came away from the experience smarter from having been around them and really trusting and admiring the judgment that they brought to bear to this. Secondly, I also would like to thank all of the staff support that did a lot of work behind the scenes with very little credit. You know, any people from KLRD to consultants to the Office of Recovery. I was on a lot of the videos, you know, facilitating the advisory panel sessions, but there was a lot of work that went on behind the scenes. So I would like to thank them as well. Yeah, I have shown this slide of the Spark Executive Committee guiding principles. I believe for every single one of the, I think it was about 26 sessions that I facilitated over the last few months to make sure that these goals stayed top of mind for everyone. I think that all of you are familiar with them, but really the focus, and this was taken to heart by every single one of the panels, was focus on one-time use of funds, understand the sweet spot for these funds in the context of other funds, and find ways to leverage to the extent possible. The third one, incredibly important, foster long-term systemic impact for Kansas. So if you were standing 10 years from now, you know, the goal would be you'd be able to look at some of the really important things that we're focused on through the course of this process and feel that it made a difference for Kansas. And then finally, you know, making sure that we're considering equitable opportunities, which I believe happened over the course of all of the sessions, enable flexibility with the investment strategies and ensure that the results are measurable and transparent. And we also, because COMA was in place for this process, we obviously ensured that level of transparency as well in terms of how the process itself played out. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this, but the panels each saw this slide as they worked their way through the process. You know, the goal was for each one of the panels to be able to get information from a variety of different sources. There were public idea submissions, also a tremendous amount of work that was done around needs assessment, interviews, bringing in experts, research from other states. And so the panelists spent a lot of time, particularly at the start of the process, really trying to kind of absorb the situations in each one of their areas, with the goal of then being able to brainstorm as well as begin to focus in on where they thought the greatest needs and opportunities were and the highest leverage points were against those. So continuing to increase their focus to the point where they got to their final recommendations at the end of the day. With the goal being, you know, understanding the areas that were the most important for investment. In those areas, in 3 of the 4 cases, being able to target, select minimum and target funding scenarios, and then within each one of those, since they would have developed the parameters for each area, identifying which of the idea submissions were the most high fit as appropriate. So that is the process that each one of them went through. A lot of work to do, a lot of judgment to be applied, and I think every one of the panels did an amazing job. So as I mentioned, today's focus is really an informational meeting, hearing back from the connectivity and efficiency and modernization panels through their chairs. And just one last reminder before I hand it over to the connectivity panel chairs is, you know, here's where we are in terms of where the available Spark funding funds sit. And as an estimate by the most current calculations, it's 397 million. You know, part of that actually got trued up because SFRF recouped some funds from FEMA for the testing. But that's where it stands now. That's about 25% of the original total. That being said, I don't think I would ever say that $397 million isn't something that you couldn't make an incredibly big difference with. So, you know, huge amount of opportunity going forward. The other thing to note is there may be other funds that come back into this as well. So one thing for the Spark Executive Committee to think about is not only how to allocate these funds, but also if and what kind of bench of potential opportunities it might want to have on hand in case other funds come back into this set of funds. So with that, I will hand it over to Senator Peterson and Melinda Stanley. One last thing, though, I would want to mention is I would like to make a shout out to Stanley Adams, who was one of the chairs of the connectivity effort at the start and had done a tremendous amount of work on this before moving on. So, there are a lot of his fingerprints and a lot of the work that went behind this, and I just wanted to note that. So with that, I will now hand it over, and like I said, I will become the slide jockey for the chairs.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Tolan and members of the Executive Committee for the opportunity to present today. Melinda Stanley and I have the privilege to share with you the product of the hard work of the Connectivity Advisory Panel. We are looking forward to the opportunity that we see to invest in a digital future for all Kansans. Next one, Don. Kansas ranks 28th in the U.S. We're in the bottom half in the U.S. for internet access. That is not where we want to be. We need fast, affordable internet access across the entire state to ensure all Kansans can participate in our increasingly digital society. But many Kansans do not have the access they need. As a state, we've already begun to fund investments in these needs, but the need is much bigger than we have currently committed. Melinda?
Sorry. Thank you. I was able to unmute. And Spark can help accelerate meeting the extenuating needs that the Senator just emphasized. To do so, the Connectivity Panel is recommending 2 primary programs focused on infrastructure and adoption enablement that build on our existing investments, outline clear parameters to ensure they are flexible to meet the unique needs of our communities, and scalable for our future while optimizing co-investment to broaden impact. John? As Senator Peterson shared, there are extenuating gaps that exist throughout Kansas relative to our proposed program areas. We'd ask for you to pause for a moment to put yourselves in the shoes of the nearly 60% of Kansans who lack access to robust broadband. What are the implications for your day-to-day, your work, your home-based business or farm? What about remote school for your kids or your health monitoring for your family members? Internet connectivity is critical to participating in today's society, yet more than 600,000 Kansas households lack robust connectivity. Additionally, many households are unable to use the service they have access to due to some enablement inhibitor. They may not have a device. They may not know how to use that device. Maybe they're just uncomfortable or new to the internet, or because they simply can't afford it. The programs that we are proposing today will take a comprehensive approach to addressing and accelerating connecting Kansans. Next slide, John. This slide outlines some of the potential funding that we already know is coming to our state that is targeted to prioritize meeting the broadband need that exists. There are multiple funding sources directed, yet we know that they're going to be insufficient to address the more than $1 billion extenuating need that exists, as we estimated what it would take to fix this challenge. Even with the more than $345 million of potential funding targeted to meet the broadband deficit, a significant gap exists in what it will take. The state fiscal and recovery funds can play a key part in continuing to rapidly deploy broadband access to all of our Kansas neighbors and make an indelible investment that impacts the quality of life in so many of our Kansas communities.
The recommendations we are sharing with you today were crafted by an advisory panel of broadband experts and stakeholders. We owe a big thanks to each one of these panelists for ensuring these programs provide us the best use of Spark dollars for our connectivity needs. Next slide, Don. Our panel met multiple times over the last 2 months to develop our recommendations. We held robust discussions and gathered written input to inform, shape, and prioritize our final program areas. Our final funding requests you see today are reflections of our recommendations to address the expressed needs of the limited Spark funds available. Next slide. These are our asks right here. Our panel is decided on 2 key programs, and all of our proposals that we received were based in these 2 programs. These are vital to improving broadband connectivity throughout Kansas. An investment of $275 million would provide robust connectivity for more than 60,000 households and ensure adoption for more than 20,000 households. And I believe with leveraging of co-investments, we can far exceed those numbers. Both of these programs would administer grants throughout Kansas that can be increased through this co-investment from our local and private sources. There are many different programs out there trying to help, and we believe that the best use of this fund is to get it in the ground, get plant in the ground, and get the adoption enablement moving forward. Melinda?
The panel recommends a funding split as we look at investment of 90% structured through the investment in infrastructure access, while 10% be allocated to those adoption enablement programs. Next slide, John. So as the connectivity advisory panel met in its last meeting, we aligned on several key parameters in each program area of focus to ensure impact. For infrastructure, the panel coalesced around investing in robust, scalable, strategic technology solutions. This is in accordance with federal guidance. Secondly, we looked at establishing connections across Kansas, prioritizing those unserved and underserved priority areas, again, in accordance with federal guidance. And finally, as Senator mentioned earlier, we prioritized optimizing co-investments, which in the case of infrastructure would also include a matching funds approach that leverages a sliding scale to help offset the challenging business case in meeting the critical need in those highly rural frontier areas of our state. For enablement, the panel prioritized leveraging existing federal funding programs such as Lifeline and the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program first as a core component, engaging with municipal partners to champion connectivity and flexibility at the local level, and finally, tailoring programs as a bridge the gap approach to meet the unique needs at the local level for devices, digital literacy, and addressing affordability. Next slide, John. Finally, one of the things that John helped make sure was to key alignment with the Spark guiding principles. In our approach, we looked at Spark as limited one-time funding, which are clearly aligned in making a significant impact on Kansans and our Kansas communities through broadband. To put the potential of this opportunity into perspective, just this week, I was working with one of our city managers who oversees the work in a county seat community of about 6,000 people. They had just completed engaging their community in a countywide strategic plan. The community feedback identified broadband access as their #1 most compelling need. This was above affordable housing, above childcare. For so many of our rural Kansas communities, broadband and the quality of life implications are inseparable. The Spark Committee has an unprecedented opportunity to help advance connectivity to our communities and to our neighbors through the recovery funds. I think that's the next slide, John.
In summary, these investments are needed to ensure that all Kansas can actively and equally participate in today's digital society. As you consider a lot of important programs in the next coming month, please remember that access to the economy, education, work, healthcare, public services require robust access to the internet. We determined that we wanted to have this be scalable. Just a couple years ago, we were looking at 10.1 and 25.3 for download and upload speeds. Now the minimum is 100 by 100. We learned through our panel that our agriculture needs is upload speeds is very important as they go to precision agriculture, saving them lots of dollars on fertilizer and being better stewards of our ground. Thank you for your time. We're happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Senator Peterson, Melinda, thank you very much. And thank you to the entire Connectivity Committee for all the work that's gone into this. This is an excellent presentation. Let me open it up now for questions from the Executive Committee.
This is Ty. Can you hear me?
Yes, President Masterson.
So Mike, what was the total dollar value of kind of proposed projects in connectivity? I know the recommendation, the 90-10 split, did that match some of your recommendations? What was the dollar value? Did you guys spend any time prioritizing some specific projects as well from your perspective?
We looked at the projects as we tried to develop what we needed to do, but we've tried to keep it programmatic because our state's so varied, President, that there's different needs going to be in different areas. So there'll be different matches that'll be required. We wanted to emphasize, kind of like in our Ike Legacy Transportation Program, that the cost share program can really leverage this. But we had over $1.3 billion worth of requests. Did that answer your question?
It did. It brings in additional questions as we go into the programmatic side of that. Who's best positioned to then refine those requests down into highest priority? You know, the biggest bang for the buck, the best match for the money, the most needed project. Is that your working group? Is that who is best positioned to then make that decision?
Well, a lot of our working group had stakeholders that probably would be making requests. So I thought that maybe the Kansas Office of Broadband Development, when they get the state guidelines out, would probably be well suited to do that. A lot of these funds require the procurement process and stuff, and they've already been working with these during the accelerated grant programs.
Do you guys as a working group have written anywhere kind of your version of priority on those proposals?
I don't know that we have written, but the group discussion was, if we putting the plan in the ground seemed to be the most important, even over adoptability, because there's a lot of other programs, even libraries, that are offering devices and education for people, but getting the fiber or whatever scalable technology in the ground is really important. Some areas you may have to use some other technologies to make it happen, but it's important that we can get this moving.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Peterson and Melinda, could you talk a little bit about the 90-10 split between infrastructure and adoption? And, is that Is that science or art in terms of how you came to that particular approach?
Linda, you want to start on that one?
You bet. I would say it's a combination of both art and science. Obviously, digital inclusion and equity is a part of ensuring that all Kansans are connected. But there's such a significant cost factor in infrastructure. We had a lot of discussion in the panel about what is the appropriate split, and coalescing around 10% made sense. That's what we have seen in our other broadband programs, and it seems to be enough. And then I mentioned bridging the gap earlier in terms of leveraging federal dollars and federal program opportunities first from an adoption standpoint, because we want to put those in play first and let the state funds bridge that gap, and that made sense. So a little bit of both, Lieutenant Governor.
Lieutenant Governor, we even did a poll of our panel on this one, and it was interesting. We had several members that believed if we were more towards the minimum ask, they wanted more into the structured wiring and less in adoptability. They believed the most important use of the one-time funds was getting the plant in the ground, particularly as currently we're seeing long lead times and such inflation on the cost of the fiber and the equipment needed.
Okay, great. Senator Peterson, Belinda, thank you. Other questions from the executive committee?
Lieutenant Governor.
Yes, Mr. Orman.
Just one quick question for the chair and the vice chair. It sounds like the goal that you were solving for was principally driving up broadband access at the home. Were there other goals that your advisory panel considered and then ultimately discarded, or did you center on this as the principal goal right away?
It was fairly centered, but we did, talking to stakeholders, getting the fiber in the ground. Once you get the fiber in place, that allows our businesses opportunities to come on board and provides more opportunities for them. I mean, in this world, real estate, when businesses are looking at location, one of the factors in that location is what kind of broadband access do we have. We even learned, that our precision ag needs so much more upload speeds, and they can save sizable dollars. I know personally on our farm in Nebraska, just a small 40-acre patch that's left, we saved over $1,500 by using some precision ag. And it's just amazing just on fertilizer costs. And that was before this year, with the tripling the cost of fertilizer.
And I would just add on that there was brief discussion on the infrastructure dollars that may be coming later have set aside a competitive middle mile opportunity. So we recognize that as well as a need.
I'd like to ask a question, if that's okay. I was curious, as you look at the cost of providing this resource to the rural areas, and I agree 100% that it needs to be done. Obviously, there's a tremendous cost of getting the initial installation done, but there's going to be a significant cost to maintaining that infrastructure, which will not be readily borne by the folks that are being served in those areas. And so I think there's going to be an ongoing cost associated with that. I was curious, 100 years ago, we implemented universal access fees for telephones in order to get the rural areas served. And I was curious as to, was there any conversation in the committee about a universal fee, or maybe repurposing the universal telephone fee to help fund some of the costs of maintaining, developing and maintaining this broadband infrastructure throughout the state?
Linda, you want to start?
Sure, I'm not aware. Of course, I joined the committee in midstream, but I'm not aware of any discussions regarding universal service. But we certainly had conversations regarding the ongoing maintenance and affordability factor, the operational costs. which is why we looked at the sliding scale approach on the infrastructure investment side, because we've heard from our communities and our service provider community that it needs to be lower, and the cost of building out into these areas that are unserved, just such a difficult business case to make. And so we built in that sliding scale to at least incentivize the build and the infrastructure access. But as I understand it, this funding is not an operational fund. So we would have to rely somewhat on those that are going to be participating in the program to take the operational aspect of those costs on.
Mr. Pickard, there was some brief discussion early on about that. What some of the stakeholders were sharing was that they're deploying fiber now to actually put in a lot of the phones when they put in their internet, because they're, it's the cost is opening up the ground and getting it in. A lot of them are providing services out there that actually have internet and the phones are VoIP. But the ongoing support was mainly focused on the FCC, and the discussions were brief.
Okay, thank you.
Lieutenant Governor,
Yes, please go ahead.
did you guys weigh some of these advancements going on with all the satellites going up in the sky? So versus having to lay the hard wire and looking at, what it would look like to partner with a Starlink or something like that in the future. How long term is this that we're going to be laying fiber in the ground instead of pulling it out of space? Do you guys have a thought on that?
We did have some brief discussions on that. A lot of that was around that, here just a couple of years ago, we were looking at 25.3, trying to get a map developed of where it was in our area. And now we know we need to be scalable. And so that's why we pushed the scalability of this. Your satellites can meet the needs now, but we need to know what we can do in the future. We're seeing a lot of good stuff coming out of Ukraine there when they deployed some satellite and low Earth orbit stuff. But it is slow. It's not meeting the needs of our businesses, and probably wouldn't meet the upload speeds of precision ag.
And I would offer an additional comment that our intent here at the Office of Broadband Development would be to remain technology neutral because of rapid advancements in technology, and in accordance with federal guidance, we would be approaching this from a technology neutral standpoint, rather looking at throughput and speeds and the best scalable technology solutions.
Other questions or comments from executive committee members?
Well, I got one more, I guess, and this is a little bit to the Spark Committee as well as to the chairs. Thank you guys for your work on this, by the way. Meetings are a heavy lift in a short amount of time over complex subjects. So, and this just shows my ignorance and this historically. I know when I talk to people out there, there's a lot of concern around how this one has the possibility to just directly supplant and favor private businesses over each other, whose wire it is and who's going to get the customers and all that sort of stuff. What thoughts do you guys have around that? Both my fellow committee members and the connectivity committee here around that, and how we balance that as we think about helping solve this issue.
I'll start that off with a thought. We don't want to overbuild where they already have decent service or robust service, but we do need to keep our folks going on. There's a lot of opportunities in our state, like on the outside rings of some of the cities, that you might be able to add on fairly cost effectively and bring quite a few people into a good, robust, scalable option. It's just getting the speed that they need and having it to where in the future it can be increased. That's the technology we want to be looking at. And there may be spaces where they have to use other technologies just to get some internet to there. I mean, 11% of all Kansas don't even have 25.3 right now.
And in addition, I would suggest one of the things that we have incorporated into our programs is the co-investment aspect, where, you know, we are seeing municipalities investing in projects which help us, one, identify that they really truly are in partnership with the service providers and or the organizations that will potentially own the infrastructure at the end of the build. But I would say that the vast majority of those organizations are Kansas businesses who are, you know, embedded and committed to their communities. So I think it's, you know, it's been a balanced approach, but seeing the co-investment helps us have confidence that the community is partnering at the table, along with potentially other community anchors, whether it's schools or healthcare institutions and such. So that would be one way that we could help ensure that the investment, it has impact and continues to make sure that there's a balanced approach and a community-wide approach.
And Mr. Rolfe, I might add, with my Commerce Secretary hat on, I agree very much with Senator Peterson's point that we've got to make sure that we're not overbuilding and that we're not you know, adding layers of redundancy, because Lord knows there's plenty of need to go around in this state. And so there's a lot of areas that are unserved. And so we've got to be wise about how we invest in those places as our priority. We found that through the CARES Act funding, with the SURGE program that was set up to build broadband infrastructure, $50 million went into that, that it was very helpful for us to put out the RFP, get the responses in, be able to plot where these investments are going to go on a map. And then through the broadband acceleration grants, we had an open public comment period where these proposals were put up for anyone to be able to comment, whether that's a provider, whether that's a community member, a business. And we took all those comments in, and those were considered as part of the scoring and the review process that ultimately led to the decisions on the grants. So there's been a good process that I think the Office of Broadband Development has put together that has proven to be successful on making sure that we don't run into some of those pitfalls. Mr. Pickard.
I guess I'd like to follow up. I was glad to hear you all talk about the importance of leveraging existing investments or co-investments, particularly with the local communities or other private providers. I was just curious, you talked about a sliding scale of state support depending upon the cost and the density of the service to be provided. I was curious, how does that get developed? Who's responsible for kind of determining what that sliding scale looks like and how that's going to be implemented? I'm just curious, because I think you're absolutely right that that's what needs to happen, and we need to get as much leveraging of existing investment as possible. And who handles the determinations there?
It would be difficult to put a formula to that. You know, the density is one item, but, you know, in our varying topography and geography we have in our state, some areas you may be using a rock saw to put something in the ground. Other areas you may be running with a cable plow as fast as it'll run. So it's going to have someone based that can determine this and look at the needs and what the area is, and know the general geography of the areas to determine. But we do want to leverage that as much as possible. I think we can exceed these numbers fairly easily with the right program. Melinda?
Yes, indeed, and it is something that that may be more of an art, to quote the Lieutenant Governor, than a science. But we are taking a number of factors. I mean, obviously, population density, economically challenged areas. There would be a number of considerations, even, you know, whether there's rock or, you know, I mean, so we have not completely worked through that. We know that that's the right approach. And So we're still work in progress on that.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if no other questions, again, let me thank Senator Peterson, Linda Stanley, the entire connectivity advisory panel for excellent work here. We appreciate very much the many hours, the blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into these recommendations and really the thoughtful way in which you've approached this. So thank you for being here today, and we will believe, John, we move on to efficiency and modernization.
Yes. So with that, I will hand over the presentation, although I will continue to be the slide jockey for Representative Waymaster and Mark Hutton, who are the co-chairs of this panel.
All right, thank you, John, and thank you to the Executive Spark Committee to listen to the recommendations that will be going through today from the Efficiency and Modernization Advisory Panel. I would say from the onset, when I first talked to John and when Mark and I connected, we were kind of quizzical on what exactly the Efficiency and Modernization Committee would be looking like. But once we got all the applications, about 140 came into our particular advisory panel, which varied from across the state, from either private citizens or private companies, counties, cities, state government. So we had a wide variety of applications that came through. But once we started going through those applications, it was very easy to determine exactly which ones we wanted to move forward with. And those are part of our recommendations today. We wanted to focus mainly on the modernization and the efficiency of state government. Obviously, with the onset of COVID in March of 2020, we had to change and alter the way that we conduct state government. Obviously, if you go to the Capitol, it's a different environment than what it was prior to COVID-19. But there are a lot of things that we can do to streamline the efficiency of state government across the state, and that will be reflective in our recommendations. So, Mark, I didn't know if you wanted to have any opening comments as well.
No, I would echo. It took us a while to kind of find our footing. It was great leadership on John's part to kind of refocus us on away from individual programs to eventually to the programmatic recommendations we'll be presenting today.
All right, thank you, Mark. John, next slide. So as kind of mentioned in my opening comments, we wanted to move the state into the future. I mean, we wanted to modernize the current systems that we already have, and then also kind of think outside the box, which will be reflective in the recommendations that were made by the advisory panel on how we can modernize state government. So we obviously wanted to accelerate the state's ability to deliver public services reliable and securely, target critical enhancements needed to maintain facilities and promote public health and safety, support agencies as they respond to COVID-driven demand and build resilience for the future, and ensure public safety outcomes and interoperable communication systems statewide. Next slide, and Mark is going to take slide 2.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chairman. So, we started out with just working through ourselves as a committee on a shared understanding of what our current needs are and what the opportunities are in Kansas, with a specific eye towards what was not going to be an ongoing cost, but a one-time cost, as well as impact eventually to the taxpayers of the state of Kansas. That led us through kind of an initial idea brainstorming. And as Chairman Waymaster said, we had about 140 submittals. I forget the dollar amount, but it was well past what we're going to have, what you're going to have to spend today. So we went through a program review where we filtered that long list of submissions down, and like I said, reorganize those into programmatic areas that we feel, and we came down with 4 different areas that we're going to be presenting today. We then prioritized those and narrowed those down even more to, I think, better reflect what we felt was a realistic approach to this allocation of funds, and right-sizing those, if you will, to what we felt was a kind of a target funding, as well as kind of what we felt the minimum that it would take. And that's what brings us here today with our 5 recommendations.
All right, John, I think next slide. So obviously there were 10 members of the advisory panel, and I want to commend all of them for their knowledge and their conversation when we were going through all of those 140 applications that were submitted to the advisory panel for government modernization and efficiency. We had a very robust conversation. We talked about every single submittal and went through it. I also have to say that one of the first agreements that all the members agreed to was we relied on the sifting and the scoring of each of those applications, whether or not that fell in the purview of the definition from the American Rescue Plan Act money that was sent to us by the federal government. So I just want to commend all of the members. And as Mark mentioned as well, I want to commend John for his leadership and also for being the facilitator during these meetings because it was a lengthy process. And the 5 meetings that we had for 2 hours, we dedicated our time to go through these applications to make sure that we can better serve the people of the state of Kansas more efficiently and in a more modern way. Next slide. So when we get to the recommendations, you're going to see a proposed portfolio of 5 different opportunities that we addressed when we had the advisory panel meetings. So obviously you see on the slide that we wanted to accelerate and enhance state delivery of public services, enable critical facility improvements, adapt to COVID-driven increases in demand for services, and build state resilience against future disruptions, modernize the state safety and security equipment, and then also extend local funding to promote public safety. So those 5 programs that Mark mentioned in the prior slide was state IT infrastructure, state facilities modernization, state continuity of operations, state safety and security equipment, and local safety and security equipment. I'd like to focus on the local safety and security equipment, and why we have that as a separate program is because we received a lot of applications from individual counties or cities that they are needing to upgrade some of their safety and security equipment under federal guidelines. So instead of just trying to allocate funds to those counties or cities that happen to submit us an application, we want to make it fair and equitable to all of the 105 counties and all the cities across the state of Kansas, that they have the opportunity to apply for that as well. But we want to commend the committee, the counties and the cities that did bring those forward to us so we could have that discussion on the local safety and security equipment. Next slide. So here's the breakdown of those 5 different programs that we came up with. So under state IT infrastructure, we wanted to accelerate major IT enhancements, which is digitization, cyber infrastructure, which obviously this coincides very well with the connectivity advisory panel going before us, because we're going to be relying on connectivity for a lot of the items that we're going to be addressing today. So we wanted to have, as I mentioned before, reliable, efficient, and secure delivery of critical state services, enhanced access to services for Kansas, interoperability, and standardization. So Mark, if you'll take state facilities.
Yeah, and I just want to tag on a little bit on the IT infrastructure in that I think we looked at that as the filter of how do we serve taxpayers in the state of Kansas and make their interaction with government better and more secure. And so state facilities and modernization is a little different in that I think the filter there was how do we save money for the state by improving the current facilities and how they operate. And good case in point, you'll see a lot of HVAC modernization projects in there. Those will yield long-term benefits to the state in lower maintenance costs as well as lower operational costs. And so kind of 2 different philosophies built in there as you look at those. But the healthy and safe facilities for our users and employees was really the primary filter that we looked at as it relates again to we want our taxpayers when they interact with our state facilities to feel good about that. These all went to that.
So then we talk about the state continuity of operations, and this is basically a program that we put in had discussion on and put into place to basically protect the state and propel the state if we would happen to be in another pandemic. So obviously we wanted to provide support and deliver and adapt essential state services for minimal disruption, and then also the resiliency of services and mitigated impact for future disruptions. As I mentioned before, we want to address the needs of the state operations, as Mark mentioned, for the taxpayers and the people of the state of Kansas, that if we ever would find ourselves in a pandemic, that the state of Kansas has positioned itself to be ready for that pandemic. So Mark, state
And
safety.
then, you bet. And then, so for state safety and security equipment, this was about protecting our law enforcement people and giving them the tools they need to effectively and safely do their job and do everything we can to make sure they go home at night. And so we looked at a lot of communications for our state, like KBI and Highway Patrol and Parks and Wildlife, as well as other related needs that, again, ensured their ability to go home at night.
And then, as I mentioned, when we're kind of going through the 5 programs on the previous slide, we have the local safety and security equipment, very similar to what Mark said in regards to state safety. But as I mentioned before, this was brought forward to us by the counties and the cities that were wanting to upgrade their safety and security equipment. And so obviously we wanted to have this be a matching fund with the local law enforcement. So either the county or the city would put in some money in regards to updating that safety and security equipment. A lot of this had to be within compliance with the federal standards. We heard that over and over in the submittals from the counties and the cities, is that they have to have this in place and within a couple of years to be compliant with the federal government. And this also would improve emergency operations across the state and for our local government. So you'll see that with the total of the 5 programs, we have a minimum ask from the advisory panel of 105 million. And I believe before Mark was talking about the 140 applications on the previous slide, I believe the total amount that we had was over $400 million in submittals. And then we have a target ask of $131 million. That would be the ceiling of what we're going to be asking for from the Spark Executive Committee today. So kind of breaking down on the next slide, we'll be seeing what we categorized all of those for. So we'll kind of take it again like we did on the previous one. So on state IT infrastructure, we have a minimum ask of 28 million with a target of 46 million. Those are broken down by the CanWin network, which actually was established, I believe, in the mid-90s to try to modernize the web presence with the state of Kansas. Judicial centralization, obviously we saw a lot of impacts with our court system during the pandemic, and so we want to make sure that the judicial branch would be able to still conduct business for the people of the state of Kansas. Infrastructure modernization and upgrades, cybersecurity, data warehouse, constituency single sign-on, and then children and family electronic records. And actually, I'll have Mark discuss that one in detail if there's any questions, because he has some personal reflections on that. We also did have a conversation. This was actually, I believe it was a submission by an advisory panel member, but we didn't know exactly what the dollar amount was going to be in regards to the digitalization of driver's license in particular. But then we had conversations with a private entity that actually said they could do all of the vital records for the state of Kansas and for the people of Kansas for $10 million, which was $15 million reduced from the initial ask. So if there is additional funds, which I know, I think in the previous panel's discussion, we only have about $390 million left. But we would like to move forward with the digital ID records, which not only includes the driver's license, but that's also your registration, birth certificate, death certificates, marriage certificates. They can digitalize all records for the state, and this particular private firm has been doing this for other states across the nation. So we wanted to have that added because that actually kind of came back to us after we had already made our recommendations. But I think it is a positive step in moving forward for the state of Kansas. So Mark,
both the children and families electronic records is a little close to us. Our son and daughter-in-law do some foster parenting, and we were shocked to learn that they're still keeping records in 3-ring binders on these kids. And so we just really believe that digitizing those records and going forward with a robust electronic record system would be in the best interest of that group. The other thing, I mean, on the digital records for driver's license and the like, I don't think there's any one thing this committee could do that would impact more directly our taxpayers in this state than to clean up and make it easier to do driver's licenses, vehicle registration, and the like. I think it would have a tremendous impact, and for bang for the buck, I can't imagine a better deal. So state facilities and modernization, we talked on that briefly, number of capital complex air handler replacements so we can keep the air cool in the chambers when things get heated. Capital complex security enhancements, that's always something you've got to hustle to keep up with. And there's, so we've got suggestion for money there. The state printing plant has some system enhancements, both HVAC as well as others that they are in pretty high need for. And then we had Senator Fagg was really adamant. He had recently toured the state schools for deaf and blind, and both of those are way past due for addressing their HVAC systems. So those are kind of the projects that we threw in the hopper for that.
And then for state continuity of operations, we have a minimum ask of 28 million with a target of 31 million. Those would include upgrades to the KB lab equipment and also to their operating supply increases. The Kansas Department of Labor call center phone system, they need to upgrade and modernize their phone system. Obviously, I think we have many conversations in regard to that in the last couple of years. Public broadcasting equipment modernization, that's the largest piece of the state continuity of operations. That's 26 million. And that's for all the public broadcasting stations. They need to make upgrades to their equipment, their towers, so they can continue with the service that they have for the state of Kansas. And then also the Kansas Wildland Firefighting Grant. There's been a lot of wildfires throughout the state since December. And a lot of their equipment has been destroyed or damaged. And so we need to get a grant there for them so they can replenish their vehicles. All right.
The public broadcasting grant, they played a pretty significant role in educating the public during the last COVID pandemic. And we wanted to make sure they were equipped to continue carrying those public health messages and help protect our public. State safety, and I'm sorry, Chairman.
I was going to say, and kind of talking about that, 20 years ago, the state actually had to take out bonds for the modernization of the equipment for the public broadcasting stations. So we felt it was use for us to use federal dollars as opposed for them coming back to the state later on, like they did 20 years ago, and taking bonds out. Yeah. Mark.
Of course, under state safety and security equipment, it's all things radio and communications. And I think we all understand, as we've learned about various national emergencies and state emergencies, the communication between our law enforcement is vitally critical. And so, we're recommending a $20 million spend on that. All Kansas Highway Patrol, KBI, as well as Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, all radio replacements so that they'll be up to date.
And the local safety and security equipment is very similar to what Mark just talked about for the state safety. Again, we're doing this for federal compliance for those counties and cities that submitted us the applications in regards, very similar to the state departments that need to upgrade their radios. So do the counties and the cities. So this would be, like I mentioned before, a local match. And this would allow for them to upgrade those radios and then other safety equipment that was going to be required by the federal government in the near future. John, next slide. So here is kind of a breakdown of each of those 5 different programs and the impact and feasibility throughout the state of Kansas. So you'll see that under state IT infrastructure, it's a high to align in the guiding principles. It has a high impact and feasibility. It would be a one-time investment that would provide opportunity for broader efficiency savings in the future. So Mark, state facilities.
Again, probably ranks some of the highest up there with a high long-term measurable efficiency gain and return on that investment, as well as long-term savings on maintenance and the like. So high feasibility. We have a lot of these projects that are set up, ready to go. So they would be already built into the capital improvement plans.
And then for state continuity of operations, obviously the alignment to the guiding principles medium, we would have the potential to leverage agency funds and employ flexible investment. The impact would target near-term agency support and build resiliency, but the feasibility is high, would be a one-time use of funds with a high degree of executability. So, Mark?
Yeah, state safety, you know, it sits in there with as a medium, you know, it accelerates agency investment, something that they're going to have to do. So that would free up other funds for other things if we could support it through the Spark funding. You know, they're required by the federal government, so it's not something that's optional. And again, it's a very high one-time fund efficient and a clear path to how we get it done.
And very similar to what Mark just talked about with the state safety and security equipment, so far with the local safety and security equipment. It's high, it's driven equitable local outcomes through extending impact of local funds. The impact medium will enable required upgrades to critical equipment. And again, this would also be for federal compliance. And then the feasibility be the one-time use of funds, and it would be needed to be administered through local awards. So the next slide. So this is the ask that we're making for the Spark Executive Committee. Our target areas are 28 to 46 million for state IT infrastructure, 24 million for state facility modernization, 28 to 31 million for state continuity of operations, 20 million for state safety and security equipment, and 5 to 10 for local safety and security equipment, again, which would be locally matched by local forms of government.
And that would be a competitive grant
Yes.
process.
And with that, Mark and I, or John, all 3 of us will stay in for questions.
Wonderful. Representative Waymaster, Mr. Hutton, thank you so very much. Again, excellent work that's been done here. Let's open it up for questions from the Spark Executive Committee members.
Hey, Governor, it's Ty again.
Yes, Mr. President.
Question for the committee is, because this is an area that's a lot like debt payment, right? One time, but get you some out year return. Did you look at some of the projects and estimate actually dollar returns on the investment? You know, i.e. we did this, whatever the proposal was, the HVAC system's going to save us this much money in the out years. Do we have any type of dollar estimate on our highest value bang for the buck return on investment?
Mark brought that up a lot during our conversation, so I'll have him discuss that.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have time, President Masterson, to really get into the deep dive analysis of what the returns would be on each of those. They're going to vary based on the equipment that's going to be replaced. For instance, the air handling units at the Capitol complex would not yield the savings that a new chiller would at the School for Deaf, because they're more of an, you know, they use a lot more energy. And so you'd have to look at those kind of individually. I think that'd be something that you might want to do as a committee, is to have them come back and prioritize those based on return on investment. They're both on long-term maintenance as well as operational costs.
Got you. Thanks, Mark. Did any of the proposals estimate savings from their perspective? For example, the digitization of all the records and that type of thing, was there outside? Because that's a little subjective, but did any of the proposals, whether it was structural or digitization, or whether any of the proposers guess at savings?
I don't recall seeing any of that in the literature we were presented. If you're talking about the kind of the are you talking about the one for children and families?
Yeah, the one that was mentioned about, could do anything from driver's license to you name it.
Oh, that one. That was actually my crazy idea. And I didn't have time to really put any dollars to it, but I think, it depends on kind of how far you want to take it, to the point that you could dramatically reduce the staffing at some of our substations where those transactions occur. If you can, if you can drive 80-90% of the state population to an online process that's faster, smoother, and more efficient, then you should be able to start realizing operationally a reduction in those satellite locations.
It seems
That's
to me
my thought.
that would be a worthwhile endeavor for this entire category. Just like when we were looking at debt, we were looking for the highest interest rates to pay off.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
returns, it seems like it'd be a worthwhile endeavor in this particular category to do that to any proposal we consider and kind of prioritize.
This has the potential to really jumpstart a process that could have a really deep impact on not just saving money, but kind of the opinion of the taxpayers have on dealing with the state, which is, based on what I've heard and my personal experiences, isn't the best when it comes to motor vehicle department.
Thank you, Mark.
And President Masterson, if I could elaborate on that as well. So when I talked to the firm in regards to what they'd be able to do, they'd be able to streamline all of the legal documents that someone may need to forward on to another entity. For example, just this last session, I had to get a death certificate for my grandfather. So I had to basically pay for it on the Vital Statistics website, wait 7 days, walk from the Capitol to the Office of Vital Statistics to go pick up the paper copy that I later scanned and emailed to the Department of Defense. And so if you could have done that online, you could have had it instantaneously. And what this will do is it will also provide for residents of the state of Kansas to have a digital file where they can house all of these records. So you don't have to keep going back to the Vital Statistics and trying to get a new document each time that one might be lost. That's just an example of that.
So why cartoons use sloths in place of government employees, because it's a speed of government, right?
No, what was that?
It was a joke. We'll move on.
Oh, okay.
Other questions from the executive committee?
Lieutenant Governor, can I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Orman.
And actually, Representative Waymaster, I would echo what you said about the efficiencies that are available to us. I moved my mother to Kansas in June, and it's taken almost 9 months to get her car retitled in Kansas because of the various things you have to go through in terms of moving documents from one place to another. It got so bad, actually, that she told the woman who finally resolved it for her that she'd be in her prayers for the rest of her life. So in any event, if you look at that category number 2, where we're driving savings, and where Mr. Hutton, you suggested that there might be an opportunity really, to evaluate those on a return on investment basis. How deep were the requests or the opportunities there? I know you're limited here in how much you can ask for on the basis of really what's available to Spark right now after some of the prior expenditures. But was the $24 million target there what you would consider to be an appropriate target, or if you were to drive deeper, would we have significantly more opportunity to spend dollars in a highly positive return on capital basis for the state?
Yeah, Mr. Orman, I think you could spend all 397 million on HVAC. We had submittals all the way up from the Department of Corrections that was I think right around the $100 million range, and other agencies that were asking for a significant amount of money. And so, to answer your question, yes, there are a lot more opportunities out there that, frankly, could be vetted against an ROI model that might make more sense.
In addition to that, Mr. Orman, we also did have, in regards to the Department of Corrections, they did have it to where they're going to basically upgrade their HVAC system in all of the correctional facilities across the state. But we didn't have exactly some examples of which needed to be addressed first, as opposed to all of them. But they just went ahead and asked for $100 million to do all of the correctional facilities. We also had requests from local school districts who wanted to upgrade their HVAC system. However, we felt that it wasn't prudent for us to allow money to go to one school district when we probably should have a discussion about 286 school districts. But I mean, that category alone, like Mark said, you could probably spend all the money on HVAC systems in the applications that we received.
Well, and my suspicion is it goes beyond HVAC as well. There's probably power factor correction opportunities, lighting opportunities, building envelope opportunities. And I wonder if this just hasn't highlighted for us the need to maybe spend just a little bit of money, doing audits, doing more robust audits of state buildings to pull together that list of opportunities and then check it against return on investment, because at a point where we're still borrowing money at 4%, if you've got a couple $100 million of 20, 25, 30% ROI opportunities, it would seem that might be a prudent use of state money.
Well, the state does have the energy conservation program that provides for an avenue for just that, Mr. Orman. It's been used, I think, at times maybe a little outside of that envelope, but there are opportunities there. I think what you have to be careful of is, as you evaluate those, what is the payback, a time frame? We got into this a number of years ago, and when you start getting out more than 7 years payback on some enhancement to a mechanical system, you're on kind of a shaky ledge there as to whether you'll really see the savings or not. And that's why I would emphasize that if the committee decides to go forward, that they take a critical look at not just the return on investment, but what the time frame that return is over. Because if it starts stretching out too long, it turns into voodoo. They've all heard this if you're on the Board of Regents, you've heard me at nauseum talk about this. So, but we have moved the needle on that. So.
Are there other questions from the Executive Committee? I had one just briefly. So you touched on the public broadcasters and the equipment needs that they have. I've understood anecdotally that much of that equipment is aging and is to the point in some cases, as I understand it, that the signal strength is 40% of what it was originally designed to be. Can you talk about the relative, I guess, urgency of those investments around public broadcasters?
Well, and you're exactly correct. And actually, to go through the submissions, we actually had two submissions. One was from the public broadcasters, and I believe the other was from the Department of Commerce. Basically the same amount for the same need for the public broadcasting entities across the state of Kansas. But you're exactly right. Their equipment, some of their equipment is even older than 20 years old when we did the last upgrade with the public broadcasting bonds. So you're talking about equipment that may be nearing its end of life. There are some that are not even working now because it has reached its end of life. And in order to provide the broadcasting for the citizens across the state of Kansas, they need to upgrade their equipment. Because one thing that did happen in COVID, and Mark touched on this when we had this brought up with the 5 different programs, is that actually the public broadcasting stations across the state partnered with the Department of Education for continuation of education for the students during the time when the schools were closed. And they provided this service statewide for the education of our students. They did have expenses in regards to that. They didn't come back for the state for that. It was just a service that they provided. But again, if we're talking about the continuity of services and propelling us, if a pandemic would happen again, this is an area with the aging equipment that's across the state of Kansas. These grants to the public broadcasters would help increase and elevate their equipment in case that would arise again.
Great, thank you.
Secretary
Burns Wallace.
Yeah, hello. Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to say to the chairs and this entire committee, kind of a deep appreciation. This is an area, just given the nature of my role, that doesn't always get the attention in terms of the investments that are needed. And I appreciate you pulling out that in connecting some of these state operation investments to the direct impact that it has on Kansans. Because when our infrastructure is lagging, it has tremendous impact on what our agencies are able to deliver and that efficiency and those returns and what that looks like. So deep appreciation. I know that you all had just a high number of requests. Many of these, I would say that particularly those that come out of the state agencies, the reason that they were able to produce the number that you have is that the state agencies are aware, they track on these things. It's that typically when funds are not available, these are projects or initiatives that have to be funded across multiple years. And Representative Waymaster, you know this because you see it in budget committees where we aren't able to replace the HVACs, as we would like, or, as soon as we have to stretch them across in that. And so this funding and identifying some of this one-time funding really allows the state to move efficiency, but expeditiously in a number of areas. So just true appreciation there for kind of shining that light into this area. The one thing that I would just also mention as you all were talking through this is a really good example as the committee thinks about it, in that in these categories and the projects that have been identified, as well as, the areas for investment, that at the end of the day, when fully executed, we do have to ensure that there is a competitive process for identifying the actual vendors that deliver those services as are required both by our state regs and the Fed regs. And so even with the matching program, I believe as Co-Chair Hutton had mentioned, being able to create a competitive grant process for the counties to apply to, those types of things will help us be able to execute these things as well. So thank you again.
If I could, Chair, add that, there's another element to the HVAC systems that we didn't touch on, and that's creating healthy buildings. One of the critical elements during the COVID pandemic was air changes in buildings and how we move air. And we learned a lot through that. And it's, I think this would give us a chance to make sure that when the next challenge from a health standpoint comes around, that we've got as many buildings as possible ready to deal with that from how they change air.
I want to echo Secretary Burns Wallace's words of both appreciation and also to acknowledge that, efficiency and modernization isn't always the most glamorous topic until you need to get a driver's license or a death certificate, or you want to turn on Sesame Street for your kids, or you're in a building that doesn't have, good HVAC, or if you're a taxpayer and you want to make sure that those tax dollars are being spent as efficiently as they possibly can. And so we're really grateful, Chairman Waymaster, Chairman Hutton, and all the members of this advisory panel for a lot of very good, thoughtful work that's gone into these recommendations here. So thank you very much.
It's been my honor, and again, want to put in a plug for John and the job he did and his crew. They did a great job of herding cats, for sure.
Thank you.
Yes, they have. All right. Thanks again. And John, I'm going to turn it back to you to wrap us up as we get ready to finish out.
Sure. Just a couple more things. Just wanted to provide one quick, one-page update on some of the programs that have already come through the Spark process. Most of these are working through the Office of Recovery or agency. So if you have more detailed questions, probably the secretary would be better positioned to answer them. But in terms of the frontline hospital worker retention program, the deadline for the funds was the end of February. Final reports were due March 15th. I think some are still coming in. Economic development infrastructure, as you know, those applications closed and the awards were announced this week. Extension of testing funding, that's where we saw it on that earlier slide that the FEMA reimbursement was received, so great news there. Learning recovery grant program, that's still in development in terms of program design. Kansas Connect and Learn, the $4 million was transferred to KSDE, and 24/7 pay plan, the funds are continuing to be utilized as outlined in the Spark proposal. Like I said, I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'm fairly shallow in my understanding of these areas, but I'd open it up if anyone does.
Any questions on these program updates? Okay. Well, John, thank you very much. As all of our co-chairs noted today, you've really done yeoman service in getting both these two committees and the two committees we'll hear from on Monday to this recommendation stage. And so thank you for your expert guidance and navigating this process so well. So we're all very appreciative. So we will be back together as an executive committee on Monday, where we will hear the recommendations from both the Health and Education and the Economic Revitalization Committee. So that'll be another virtual meeting at 3 p.m. This coming Monday. And so with that, are there any other points members of the executive committee would like to bring forward before we adjourn? Okay, well, we thank you for your work today. They've given us a lot to think about in terms of both needs and opportunities. And remember that we're very fortunate to be able to do this work, to be able to have these dollars to invest. And we will be getting to the decision point soon, but we'll have more to think about and hear from on Monday. So we will see you then. Thank you all so much.
Have a great weekend all. Thank you.